Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, members, let's see if we can wake up a little bit. Here's one of the ways you might suspect you're being lied to. You're engaged in conversation, you're trying to get to the heart of a matter, and the more specific you try to be, the more you try to drill down and really get to the heart of what it is that you're talking about, the more the other side is evasive and obfuscates and it's ambiguous, tries to broaden the view of what it is that we're talking about rather than narrow in and be specific and tell us what it really is. We got that right off the bat, first thing, as soon as we started hearing about this bill tonight. Representative Finke told us what we were going to hear, predicted what we were going to say about this bill, and tried to preempt it by saying, this isn't kidnapping, this isn't about trafficking, this isn't about harming children. All of that is a lie. Then we had, during the amendments that were being considered, we discovered this interesting Venn diagram between what is considered gender-affirming care and what is considered elsewhere to be crime. And in the midst of all that conversation, we kept hearing these things offered in terms of examples of what gender-affirming care might be. Well, it might be, oh, I don't know, wearing clothes that affirm your professed identity. It might be, I don't know, respecting pronouns. That might be what we're talking about. Now, let me tell you why I don't trust that. And I'll just be honest, I don't trust it, that that's what it means. You know why? Because this is a bill, despite what the author claims about what it does and doesn't do. I can read. I have a means of cognition. I understand what I see, all right? This is a bill that exists for the purpose of canceling the parental rights of citizens of the United States who don't happen to be residents of this state. Now, I could be wrong, but that might be unprecedented. A father, a mother, a parent in Alaska, in Washington, South Dakota has been mentioned, Iowa's been mentioned. What this bill says is, if your kid gets here by whatever means, and that's where we have to, in order to get away from accusations of kidnapping and accusations of trafficking, we have to broaden it out and say, well, they got here somehow by an adult acting as a parent. That's the language. Not actually is a parent, not has legal custody, but acting as a parent. The kid gets here, you're their parent, you have legal custody of them, they're your child. But they're in Minnesota, you're in Iowa. And as soon as they say the magic words, I'm looking for gender-affirming care, just like that, parental rights canceled. You no longer have access to your child. You no longer get to lay claim to the rights that you have under the laws of the state in which you reside and in which your child is a resident, visiting recently to the state of Minnesota. That's what this bill does. And, I have a hard time believing that there's a hypothetical scenario where that's going to happen over a matter of what the kid is wearing. It's not going to happen over an issue of pronouns. It's going to happen because of what's listed in lines 519 through 522. Interventions to suppress the development of indigenous secondary sex characteristics, hormone blockers, puberty blockers. Puberty blockers, wow, what a euphemism. We're going to medically intervene in the natural development of a child. And you want us to accept, and what would you start off with? 29 medical organizations want us to accept that that's ever medically necessary, that that's ever life-saving. It's life-saving to poison a kid. And it is poison. Definition: a substance with an inherent property which tends to destroy life or impair health. You're blocking a natural developmental process that is an impairment of health. It is a poison. That might be cause for a custody dispute. Probably not pronouns, probably not what they're wearing. Interventions to align the patient's appearance or physical body with the patient's gender identity. We heard examples of what that looks like from Representative Franson earlier. And again, the language that we choose to use, you got on one end of the spectrum, you got specific, on the other end of the spectrum, you got ambiguous, and even some of the language we've been using over here tonight has been relatively ambiguous. We've been doing you a favor. We've adopted your phrase, gender-affirming care. We use euphemisms like surgery, treatment. This is mutilation. What Representative Franson described, here's the definition of that: to injure, disfigure, or make imperfect by removing or irreparably damaging parts. Secondary definition: to deprive a person of a limb or other essential part. Cutting somebody's arm open and taking pieces out of it, chopping pieces off a person to create a facsimile of genitalia is mutilation. That's what it is. And the language we use matters. Being specific is important. If you care about the truth. If you care about health. If you care about the well-being of the children who we're talking about here. And that brings me back to what Representative Kraft had to say. And I appreciate it, although I find it ironic. Evoking family, evoking the relationship between a child and their parent and the love that we feel. It's interesting, you took words right out of my mouth, Representative Kraft, when you talked about parents being willing to do anything for our children. I got 2 sons, and I've said that, I've thought that. Every parent, every person in this room who has a child has had that thought sincerely and meant it. I would do anything for my child. But you don't mean it literally, right? Like, if your child says, "Dad, I want to take an umbrella and go up on top of the roof and jump off it," or if he says, "Dad, I want to go play in the middle of a 4-lane highway," if he says, "Dad, you know, I'd like to just root around under the sink and drink the prettiest liquid I can find," we're not going to allow those things to happen. We're not going to do those things. We're not going to go along with them. Not because we're not willing to do anything for our children, but specifically because inclusive within the anything we're willing to do for them is stop them when they are harming themselves. And we've all done it. There isn't a single parent in this room or anywhere in this state of Minnesota who has not intervened in what their child wanted because they knew it wasn't healthy for that child. And what you expect us to believe, and what 29 medical organizations expect us to believe, is that it is somehow life-saving and affirming to poison and mutilate. And I don't need to go to school for 8 years and become a doctor to know that's BS. And neither does any other Minnesotan. And that's another thing we heard earlier in the drift toward the ambiguous, in the drift toward less detail. We heard, well, I'm not a doctor. I don't know what any of these things are. What are words? That's where you have to go. You have to go to professions of ignorance in order to defend this. But I can go down the street to anybody still walking around along bars and restaurants and get a clear definition of what harm is. Maybe a demonstration in this city, right? I don't need to be a doctor to know when I see something's wrong. And going back to these 20, I keep bringing this up, 29 medical organizations, because you keep bringing it up, because you think it's convincing. You think it's convincing to cite the fact that we have doctors and institutions that are willing to tell us things that we can see with our eyes are not true. What you're actually telling us, and what you're actually telling everybody who views this throughout the future, is that we have rational cause to not trust people with credentials. We have rational cause to not trust institutions. I'll give you an example. I won't tell you where I got it from. Some of you may get it. There's a story of a ship captain who got captured by an enemy intelligence officer. He was held captive and he was tortured. And part of the torture involved trying to break his spirit, trying to get his submission. And the way he went about doing it is he sat and he activated this bank of lights above his head. And there were 4 lights, clear as day, easy to see. 1, 2, 3, 4. And he asked the guy, tell me how many lights you see. And he answered, well, there's 4 lights. He said, no, there's 5 lights. Now I'll ask you again, how many lights are there? He answers again, 4. No, there's not. And then comes the torture, then comes the pain. And this cycle continues. And the game is, we're going to continue to beat you, we're going to continue to inflict pain until you submit to affirm what we both know is not true. That's what all of this is. And I refuse to participate. I'm not adopting your language. I'm not respecting your preferences, because you don't own reality. You don't own grammar. You don't own definitions. You don't get to tell me. You're not important enough to provide me with an instruction manual on how to talk to you. Are you kidding? How important do you have to think you are to list at the bottom of your emails? And yeah, I see you laughing about it. Yeah, it's hilarious, isn't it? But what are the consequences for not abiding by it? What are the consequences? What would happen in this chamber if I were to address Representative Finke? Need I continue? What would the consequences be?
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Exactly. Thank you.
State your point of order.
Masons 101, we need to confine the remarks to the question before the body, and the question before the body is the bill. Also, Mason Section 124, avoiding personalities.
Members, I will remind you to confine your remarks to the bill. Representative Hudson.
This bill is premised on a rejection of reality, so there's literally nothing that's not germane. And if you want to continue to call me out of order, we can be here. I mean, what is it, 2 o'clock? I can go all night. Okay? Let's talk about love. Let's talk about children. Why is it that when we say we'll do anything for them, that doesn't include running around in the street? It doesn't include rooting around under the sink for something to drink. It's because we love them. It's because we've adopted the parental mission. The parental mission, my job, the whole purpose of being a parent, the job that I have for my kids, is I need to bring them from the place where I first find them, a place where they're wholly incapable of discerning virtually anything, certainly incapable of making and acting upon choices rationally. I need to bring them from that place all the way through, raising them up to becoming an adult who is capable of successfully negotiating reality. And when I talk about reality, I'm not talking about some subjective, ethereal, philosophical nonsense. The reason you don't go play on the street is because of this thing called physics. The reason you don't jump off the top of the house is because of this thing called gravity. These are immutable, irrefutable properties of existence that do not change. And if you try to live your life in such a way as to ignore them, do it long enough and hard enough, you are going to die. That's the level of importance to abiding by what is real. And the parental mission is to bring your kid up in such a way that the decisions that they're going to make are going to promote their health, welfare, and happiness. That is why South Dakota is passing a law to make these abhorrent practices illegal. That is why our neighbors to the south in Iowa have done the same, because they love their children, because they don't want to see harm come to them. But what we're saying here in Minnesota, and Representative Niska hit the nail right on the head earlier, what we're saying is this is secession week in the Minnesota legislature. We're opting out of the union. Your laws don't mean anything here. And there's an irony to it. We'll see how long it lasts. We'll see if it lasts. Because you can bet this will be challenged. It is unconstitutional. And I guess we'll find out. I guess we'll find out as a society, as a nation, we already know as a state, but as a broader civilization, I guess we'll eventually find out which side of this debate we're on. Are we on the side of the debate that looks at what is actually in front, that looks at the four lights and says, yep, those are four? Or are we on the side of the debate that insists that lies be affirmed